Quite simple, really. If your job is to protect the president, you're likely to be very physically fit and you're likely to go for runs. And it just so happens that lots of these people also record their runs on the fitness app Strava, and that some of them forget to turn their profiles private, leaving all of the routes of their runs available for anyone to see online should you know where to look for it. Le Monde did know where to look for it and found dozens of members of the Secret Service in the US, the GSPR in France, and members of the FSO in Russia. Once identified, they were able to find other information about these agents, whether it be on Strava or on other social media, for instance, who their family members are, pictures of their family members, or other routes that they ran, giving away where they lived. Obviously, this is a problem. If you're the president, you don't want your most close inner circle to be compromised in this way, because they could come under threat of blackmail or other risks of pressure. Worse still, the journalists also figured out that in days up to major events and major meetings abroad with these world leaders, often these same people would go for runs in the run-up at the exact same location. That's because they're dispatched early a lot of the time to secure locations, and on their time off, they'd often go for a run as well, leaving traces of it on Strava. They found many examples of this over the years, affecting leaders from Donald Trump to Emmanuel Macron, Joe Biden, Barack Obama, and even first ladies like Jill Biden and Melania Trump. God knows how many other cases there could be.
So how did the journalists know where to look exactly?
Yeah, that's one thing that's is worth pointing out. So it's not like you can go onto the Strava map now and just look at any prime minister's or president's residence and see, oh, that's where their Secret Service is. No, there's obviously lots of people running on the map, and people often leave quite funny messages like, hello, Mr. President, from my run this morning. But actually what the journalists did, I talked to one of them, Sébastien Bourdon, who told me that they look for places that other people would not be likely to be running, right? So places that only top-level security personnel would really be running. For instance, in France, this was La Lanterne, which is the president's secondary residence in Versailles. And in the US, this was the James J. Rowley Training Center near Washington, D.C. So once you picked up on the people who are running around there, you can see who is also running around, for instance, the Élysée Palace or the White House, and who is also running in many different places abroad where world leaders have been having meetings.
It's extremely surprising that nobody was aware of this ahead of time, especially, Peter, because this obviously is not the first time that Strava has been identified as a security threat.
Yeah, you've nailed it. It's such a shock. I mean, 6 years ago, though, we had this big story when Strava released its heat map for the first time, which is kind of a compilation of all the runs everyone's done on the app in public over the years. And security analysts were quick to point out on Twitter that it showed the locations of many secret military bases around the world, both where they are, their layouts, and crucially the patterns of the personnel who worked at those bases based on the runs that they were doing around the sites. This was big news, and since then, Strava has made it possible to change more things in the privacy settings on the app, but crucially, it still remains public by default, and clearly people are still not getting the message, even if they're in a very sensitive job. What's more, the security services in these different countries still don't seem to be passing the message on to their employees. Don't leave anything about yourself available on public online, especially not information like this.
So this doesn't look like people are changing their behavior despite the risks that you mentioned. Has there been any official response in any case?
Yeah. Obviously, Le Monde gave the various governments 10 days to respond, and we got responses from the Élysée and from the White House. They couldn't be more different. What the Élysée seems to be doing is damage control. They said, their statement read that the findings had absolutely no consequences for the president's security, and they even went so far as to say that the president's places of residence, the risk to the president's places of residence was absolutely non-existent. And bizarrely, it also argued that the GSPR's movements were briefed to local authorities at the time. I mean, as if that means that that's also okay to put these movements publicly available to everyone in the world. I don't think so. Meanwhile, the White House said it doesn't prohibit an employee's personal use of social media while they're off duty. This could be the problem, right? Because they'll go for these runs when they're not working, maybe on a personal device. And maybe their employer does not have purview over what they do on social media in their free time. Having said that, the statement did also say that affected personnel would be notified and that they review whether more training or guidance was needed. I have to say, though, a few days later, Le Monde published an update that said just before it published, 14 out of the 26 Secret Service members that it had identified using this method still had their profiles set to public, despite that response from the White House.
I struggle